Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. All right, so we have walked through the last 6 episodes, our 6-week series that we take people through in that Freed Up app, the content that we've been teaching for many, many years. And today I just want to wrap up some of that work by talking about this idea of faithful stewardship. What are the indicators? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it result in? And I think this might be the most compelling reason why the church needs to step into this conversation. Because so much of what we wrestle with in our church communities are rooted in fear and anxiety and senses of depression and identity crises. And all these things are rooted in a lot of thoughts that go back to misplaced ownership and misplaced responsibilities. And so when we think about stewardship, and again, this idea of stewardship is really big. It's not just finances. It's not just money. This is all of what we have in our life. It's our relationships. It's our time. It's our physical bodies. It's our skill sets, our careers. And yeah, it's our money. But if we only pigeonhole it to money, we miss the point. And if we call people to faithful stewardship where they recognize that ownership is not theirs, it's God's. God owns all of those things. Then the result, the character traits, the identity of a faithful steward is so easy to pick out because they all look the same when you boil it down. Faithful stewards are incredibly content because when you recognize God owns it all, you don't feel this need to compulsively hoard and to run after the next thing and build this fortress of safety and security. You feel really content and steady. Faithful stewards are incredibly grateful because, again, when you recognize that it is not yours, then I am so grateful for what God has given me. What a gift. What a privilege to be able to manage His resources. None of this is mine, and yet here I am with the ability to enjoy it, to invest it in the kingdom, to be part of the work that He's doing. I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to manage God's resources for Him. They tend to be, in general, healthier. They're intentional. They're thoughtful. They're managing their time well. They're managing their body well. They're fueling themselves well. They're resting well. They're really intentional. And as a result, they're healthier. They're not overcommitted. They're not overburdened. They're not buried. One of the things that I find really interesting in our society today is that we have used busyness and overcommitment and overwhelm as a calling card for success. We've said, oh man, I'm crazy busy. I got to be all over the world. I'm on a plane tomorrow. And then after that, I'm on a plane. And after that, there's constant busyness. And that is what ultimately we are presenting to each other in order to say, I'm really important. I really matter. I'm really significant. I'm really successful. Faithful stewards don't have that attitude. Faithful stewards recognize their career is God's. Their time is God's. And so they're saying, yeah, I mean, I have work to do, but it doesn't define me because it's not mine. And yeah, I have places to be, but I'm not overcommitted and overbusied because my time is His and I want to be present. I want to be available. I want to be able to meet people along the way and be in relationship with them with some intentionality rather than rushing past them. I want to be able to have long conversations and linger for a while with people who are in need and struggling. Right? So that healthiness of balance and intentionality and rest is an absolute hallmark. It's a telltale sign of a faithful steward. Faithful stewards are generous. They trust that God is the provider. They trust that He has more than enough, that there is an unbelievable abundance available to them, and so they are generous with their time, with their resources, with their skills. They're volunteering. They're giving themselves away. They're incredibly patient because they see that God has provided them with this long journey that they're enjoying, and they're content along that journey. And so they recognize that today does not define them. They recognize that their career will be a long run. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And when they are managing God's resources, they tend to be more patient. They're not seeking quick wins and get-rich-quick schemes. They're really steady and comfortable and patient. They trust in His sovereignty over those things. And they are incredible perseverers. They are unbelievable in long suffering. They are consistent. They are willing to struggle and fight for things. They're willing to step in and serve, even when it's hard and exhausting, because they're pouring themselves out. They see their work, the breath in their lungs, the skills that they have, they see that as something they can pour out for God's kingdom. They can honor Him with their work. And so they're incredibly diligent and they persevere. They're strong. Now, as I go through that list of things that identify a faithful steward, imagine what the church community would look like if that was what that community was full of. If the consistent experience of the families in your community was faithful stewardship. And so that meant that their consistent experience was contentment and patience and peace and trust and generosity and perseverance and gratitude. Oh my goodness, what would that mean for the city that you live in and that you serve? What would that mean for your community? What would it mean for this country if we had the church living this way? But so often, our church is full of people who are not stewarding their time well, who are way overcommitted to kids' activities and to work, and they're just giving way more of themselves than they can afford to give. We have families that feel a sense of scarcity and fear. They're afraid that they're going to run out of money. They're afraid that it's not going to work. They're afraid that their career is at risk. They're constantly anxious about the future, and it is really hard to step into obedience from a place of anxiety. We have people who are not feeling the confidence to be generous because they are struggling to just make ends meet. They're medicating emotion. They're spending money they don't have to feel better, and there's not enough to go around and to be generous with because they haven't solved those problems, right? I think the church has the ability to change our culture dramatically. And I'm afraid that instead, the culture has informed the church and changed it dramatically. Do we look different than the non-believer? Do we look different than the person who doesn't know Jesus? I don't know. In a lot of ways, we look pretty similar. And I think faithful stewardship is what sets us apart. It's what changes our communities. It changes relationships. It moves us to a place where we are more intentional, more aware of how all of these resources are being spent, because we want to honor God with every last bit of them. Jesus was very clear that you cannot serve both God and mammon. And mammon, in my mind, is this system. It's this desire for self-gratification and self-indulgence. It's not just money. It's the whole system that's built on consumerism. You can't serve both of them, because that system of consumerism is built entirely on entitlement and ownership, right? If I own it, I get to spend it however I want, and I want to spend it on myself. And so we can't serve both of those, because if we serve the one, if we serve mammon, we are stepping into an ownership mindset and an entitlement mindset, and it is the opposite of faithful stewardship. And if we step into serving God, by definition, we are stepping into a position of stewardship, which means mammon is not even on our radar. Now, I know that's really Pollyannish. It sounds really idealist, and it is. I agree. But I really think that is the division. That is the dividing line. That's how Jesus spelled it out. It's either this or it's that. And we need to call our communities to choose serving God, and serving God looks like faithful stewardship. Now let's bring this to practical. So that's the spiritual, those are the spiritual markers, those are the relational markers of what a faithful steward looks like. In the practical financial experience of a faithful steward, what we would see that would kind of indicate that we're moving in the direction of faithful stewardship is that they are at kind of a minimum living in this 10-10-80 plan. 10% is being given away generously, minimum. 10% is being saved for future obedience, and 80% is what they're living on. And that 80% is also including things like taxes and other costs, but that's part of the living expenses. So 10-10-80 is a great basic benchmark that says, yes, this is reasonable, this is responsible, this is faithful stewardship. Ideally, the 10 of giving grows. Ideally, we are in a place where we can allow our lifestyle to stop growing, to stop continually chasing our income. And as our income grows, we're more lavish with our generosity, with our engagement in caring for others who are in need. But as a basic starting point, that is a really healthy indicator of faithful stewardship. The next one is that we are seeing net worth growth. I think faithful stewardship looks like seeing your net worth as your measuring stick of health. A lot of times people will use their income as their test. Am I successful? It's based on, am I making a lot of money? Well, I can tell you, making a lot of money doesn't mean you're a faithful steward. Right? Making a lot of money just means you're making a lot of money. If you're spending it all, you're not faithful in your stewardship. You're in that serving mammon camp. You are basically self-indulgent, and you are making sure that you're enjoying all of that money. A faithful steward is growing their net worth for future obedience, is being a wise saver, is intentionally setting things aside, is controlling, managing, and paying down their debt, which is a way to grow your net worth. Again, those are two sides of the same coin. And the income that they're using to be faithful with is irrelevant. I don't care if they're making $500,000 or $50,000. Being intentional about growing your net worth, you are doing the things that faithful stewards do. By definition, it's impossible to grow your net worth if you're not being a prudent spender, a wise saver, and a cautious debtor. Those things all go together. And so if people are defining their success by how much money they make, and they're spending it all on themselves, they are failing. And we need to call them to account and make sure they realize that over time, the master expects multiplication. The master expects in the parable of the talents that what was given to those stewards would grow, so that in the future, the kingdom has even more resources. And the other mark of faithful stewardship is generosity that's growing. So we start with this base of 10-10-80. We recognize that net worth is growing over time, that we are paying attention to that rather than our income. And then as we have drawn these lines, we've said this is our lifestyle cap. This is where we're drawing the end of our lifestyle creep. And we're saying enough is enough. This is contentment. Then by definition, generosity should grow. The tithe is a great place to start. It's a terrible place to stop. Keep going. Keep growing in generosity. More generosity, more cheerful giving, more connection to other humans that are hurting, more lifting the burdens of those who can't carry them. Faithful stewardship is a journey. This is not a destination. This is not something that you just arrive at and you've got it fixed and you're done and now you don't have to think about it anymore. There is always more. There's always growth. There's always the next learning curve, the next challenge to overcome, the next temptation to face, to back into more self-indulgence or selfishness. There's always more in this journey. And so it always looks different. People are at different stages in the journey. They're discovering different things. They're learning the things that ignite generosity and make their heart come alive. All of these things are discovered over time, and there's always more. It's a never-ending experience of new if we let that be the conversation that we're having as a church, if we invite them in. When we see these incredible faithful stewards engaged in relationship with each other and talking about what they're learning, teaching each other, being unafraid to have conversations about stewardship because it's a language that the church is speaking. It's a topic that the church is teaching on. It's a constant conversation. Then we are fostering a community that is growing together in faithful stewardship. We're not carving them off into separate conversations and sending them into different corners and having them learn totally different thoughts and totally different approaches. We're bringing them all together and calling them into this beautiful journey of discovery, growing together as faithful stewards, and then giving themselves away as a community of stewards to the city that you live in, to the place where you've been planted, in order to bring the kingdom of God into that town. This is why the church needs to lead this conversation. It is so countercultural. It is so opposite of what all of our people are hearing and learning every day from the rest of the world. And if we stay silent, we will look like everybody else. This is our opportunity to call our people to a totally different identity that releases the kingdom into a community that is desperate for the peace and the contentment and the confidence and the trust that faithful stewards have. This world is full of reasons to be afraid and selfish, and we need people who are unafraid and selfless. That's the antidote. Faithful stewardship is the antidote. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.